Hi everyone, how are you? Welcome to another question and answer session for MRCS exam. This is the physiology portion. Via which structure the cerebrospinal fluid in this subarachnoid space? So it is a direct question that the through which structure cerebrospinal fluid enters into subarachnoid space, or it reaches between the arachnoid and pyometer. Here the options are cisterna magna, cerebral aqueduct, foramen lusca, cisterna chyli, and arachnoid granulation. So we have to find out a foramen or a space through which the cerebrospinal fluid reaches into the subarachnoid space in case of brain and also in case of the spinal cord. So now see here, this is the normal circulation of cerebrospinal fluid. So first of all, the cerebrospinal fluid, it is formed in the lateral ventricle. Actually it is in the some important cell present in the lateral ventricle. From there cerebrospinal fluid is produced. Actually it is the choroid plexus. So from the choroid plexus of the ependymal cell, cerebrospinal fluid is formed in the lateral ventricle, and from the lateral ventricle it reaches into third ventricle via a foramen, which is the foramen of Monro. So this foramen is very important, that the foramen Monro, through the foramen Monro from the third ventricle, the CSF reaches into the from the lateral ventricle, it reaches into the third ventricle. Then second one, here we can see another important structure, which is the aqueduct of Sylvius. Through the aqueduct of Sylvius from the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle, the CSF reaches. And from the fourth ventricle, here we can see foramen of Magenti and foramen of Lusca. So foramen Magenti and foramen of Lusca, through the foramen Magenti and Lusca, this cerebrospinal fluid, it reaches the cisterna magna and cisterna lateralis, and finally it reaches the subarachnoid space and also the central canal of the spinal cord. And from the subarachnoid space, it goes over the spinal cord and also the cerebral hemisphere. So now again, and this slide important foramina are foramen of Monro, aqueduct of Sylvius, foramen Magenti, foramen Lusca. So this four important is very important. Then here we can see another picture, and this picture showing the pathway of the cerebrospinal fluid. Here we can see this is the third ventricle. So from the third ventricle, this is the lateral ventricle. From the lateral ventricle, it reaches the third ventricle via a foramen, which is foramen of Monro. And from the third ventricle, it reaches fourth ventricle, another foramen, which is the aqueduct of Sylvius. And then here we can see from the fourth ventricle to the subarachnoid space of the brain and spinal cord through the foramen Magenti and Lusca. And finally reabsorption in the venous sinuses. So first foramen, which is the foramen of Monro. The second foramen is from aqueduct of Sylvius, and the third foramen Magenti and the Lusca. And why this foramina is very important? Because any obstruction in this foramina, it causes the obstruction of the outflow of the cerebrospinal fluid, and it causes hydrocephalus. That means the collection of the more cerebrospinal fluid within the brain tissue. So again, foramen Monro, it is responsible from the third ventricle, lateral ventricle to third ventricle, and aqueduct of Sylvius, it is responsible for third to fourth ventricle, and Magenti and Lusca, it causes convey of cerebrospinal fluid from fourth ventricle into the subarachnoid spaces. So it is a clear view, and here showing the CSF circulation. And here we can see, first of all, this is choroid plexus. Here this is the choroid plexus of the lateral ventricle, and from the choroid plexus blood reaches here. This is the third ventricle. This is the third ventricle, and there it is a foramina which is the interventricular foramina, or this also known as the, here we can see, foramen of Monro. So this is interventricular foramen of Monro. And then here we can see from the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle there is another canal or another foramina which is cerebral aqueduct. Here we can see cerebral aqueduct or aqueduct of Sylvius. So cerebral aqueduct or aqueduct of Sylvius, it causes the CSF circulation from the third ventricle to this fourth ventricle. So if obstruction occurs here, then CSF accumulate in this area and it causes hydrocephalus. And if obstruction occurs this area, which is cerebral aqueduct or aqueduct Sylvius, then in this condition CSF stored in this here and it causes hydrocephalus. And then finally here we can see from the fourth ventricle there medial aperture which is the foramen magneti and lateral aperture which is foramen lusca. It goes to the subarachnoid space into the spinal cord and also into the brain. And here we can see in the brain it finally goes to the, here we can see superior sagittal sinus, and this goes to the superior sagittal sinus here, and here we can see a granulation which is, this is the granulation which is the arachnoid granulation. So it is now ready that when via which structure the cerebrospinal fluid enter the subarachnoid space, it goes to subarachnoid space by two important foramina. One is the foramen of Magendie, another one is Luschka. So one is the foramen Magendie, another one is the foramen Luschka. So through the foramen Magendie and foramen Luschka, the cerebrospinal fluid it reaches the subarachnoid space both in spinal cord and in the brain tissue or in the brain area. And other option here such as the cisterna magna, it is not true. And here you can see cerebral aqueduct. The cerebral aqueduct or aqueduct Sylvius, it connects between the third and fourth ventricle of the brain. Then here we can see the arachnoid cisterna chyli. The cisterna chyli is the lymphatic vessels, and this cisterna chyli is not located in the brain area. Actually, the brain has no lymphatic vessels. The cerebrospinal fluid it replaces the lymphatic and lymphatic vessels. So the cisterna chyli, as it is located in the abdominal area, it is not related to brain and cerebrospinal fluid. Then here we can see the arachnoid granulation. The arachnoid, through the arachnoid granulation, CSF is reabsorbed. Through the arachnoid granulation, CSF is reabsorbed, and it is not related to going this half arachnoid space, because we can see in this picture here we can see the arachnoid granulation, and it is the final pass that causes reaching of the cerebrospinal fluid into the systemic circulation. So this is all about the cerebrospinal fluid. Thank you all.